talk about this idea of making places and cities foreign with people. And very, very briefly, just about Gehl, we are architects and urbanists and designers, and I myself am a engineer and social scientist, and you can tell with my accent, also American, but I've been living and working here in Copenhagen for the last 20 years. Our work is very global. We've had the opportunity to work in large cities and small cities and cold climates and warm climates and high income places and low income places from our 3 offices in Copenhagen, New York, and San Francisco. And really, in all of those contexts, we strive to put people first. And really, what that means is creating a situation where it's easy for people themselves to help create the future they want. So if we make the healthy choice the easy choice, if we make the comfortable choice the one that's also good for the planet, and the individual sort of behavior that is good for the collective, then we think we've actually made this people first approach come to reality. So that's the sort of ethos that we look at the world. And what I want to do is talk a little bit about generally this method of how we measure and test and refine, and then briefly go into some impacts of COVID, and spend a majority of the time on what I would think would be the new agenda, or the current agenda for cities going forward around air pollution, food, and the circular economy. So for us, this idea of public life, actually all the things that we do outside of our home, workplace, and car, the things that we do together, that's again where we have this opportunity to really make it possible for individual behavior to impact the future. And public life is very inclusive. It encompasses activities that might seem more typical, like civic engagement, or like having access to services. But this is also about, how we build trust, how we provide opportunities for resilience and sustainability, and also how we make sure that we have a healthy, thriving general population. So, very, very quickly about what this iterative sort of measure, test, refine process actually is. A great example of it, it's an older example, but it's still a very, very powerful one, is measuring the environment together with this idea of public life. So many years ago now, we looked at Times Square in New York and measured the space and found that it was mostly roadway and very few pedestrian space, but also measured public life and found that there were almost the inverse amount of people, 90% of people squeezed into 10% of the space, whereas 10% of the users, the motorists, were using 90% of the area there. So that led and empowered Mayor Bloomberg to do a test, to try a 6-week pilot, where we put out, recaptured some of the space, put out furniture, very cheap furniture, that to our surprise, the biggest comment about this transformation was, hey, can't you get some better chairs? Or we could use some shade. That was some of the top responses from citizens, rather than, hey, why can't we drive through here anymore? Or what have you done to my traffic lane? People very quickly acclimated themselves to the idea of, hey, isn't this great to have more space? Now we need some better furniture. So we tested, refined, built many different programs, from yoga to theater, events and activities, about better furniture and shade and artistic painting of the pavement, and then measured again. Over the years, measured how this impacted pedestrian usage, how it impacted safety through injuries, how it actually decreased travel time because we regulated the grid, and also found out qualitatively that people liked this change, and we could measure economically an increase in activity. So that process allowed then the big investment to be made, which now, designed by Snorheta, the Norwegian firm, a $50 million project to make these changes permanent. But however, it wouldn't be possible to have created that project without the knowledge and understanding that reimagining Times Square could have social, economic, and environmental benefits. So that that approach we've also used to understand COVID in our cities. We've studied 4 different Danish cities, both before the crisis, where we're always sort of measuring public life. We did that in the fall of 2019, very timely, and then we could measure what the city was used for, what these cities were used for, how they functioned when everything was locked down there in March and April, and then again in June to see what's been happening now that things are opening up again. And I'll go through a few of the elements, but you can see a lot of these results as being consistently updated at the website there below, covid19.gehlpeople.com. So 3 major trends that might seem obvious, but we have the data to prove it, and we need to be able to deal with it. We're going to work from home more often in the future, and that will impact office culture. This is data not from us, but from American data around the capacity of office space, showing that of the 10 largest cities in the US, they're all hovering around 25 to 35% capacity, and this is even through August. So this idea of before Corona, we thought, oh, we're going to work from home, right? And then all of us worked from home for many weeks, and I think we all could say, well, maybe we need another area to work that isn't. This is a very cozy picture, right? But it isn't sustainable over the long term. So is there a need for a 4th space? So not just our home work or a cafe, but might we need actually to rethink our work environment and create more local, maybe more formal than a cafe, but equally flexible workspaces that are still safe and secure and close to where we live. The second thing we saw was around how city centers were, completely abandoned, essentially. During the lockdown in particular, we saw pedestrian movement and activity go down in Copenhagen and other Danish cities 80, 90%, whereas activity in the outer neighborhoods actually went up. And I think that begins to fast forward a bit of a process that was happening already, where city centers around the world had become largely about consumption. Cappuccino and cafes everywhere, which is nice and cozy. But I think if city centers are going to survive, then they need to be reimagined a bit. And so I could point out a lot of trends here around Internet of Things, around or Industry 4.0, whatever it might be. But I think it's interesting to question how might the centers of activity in cities be as much about production as they are about consumption going forward. The third trend we really see here is that people are going to spend more time in their local neighborhoods, and this is going to increase the pressure on city budgets to invest not only in high-profile city centers, but also very much around in all the adjacent neighborhoods. And this could be a good thing, right? We know that at least in Copenhagen, during the lockdown, local meeting places that people might not have visited before became very, very popular. And after society opened up again, they maintained that popularity. So this is just an example of a local public space not far from where I live, where here you see before the pandemic in gray, you had, say, let's take kids, about this many children spending time in this location. During the lockdown, that number went way up, but now we see many more kids there than ever before, and the amount of adults is actually close to what it was before the lockdown, with new activities popping up, right? So in places like this, we see much more play and exercise thriving in these local meeting places, and a bit more of a different usage pattern. They're much more active into the afternoon and evening. So we think these elements present very real challenges and real opportunities post COVID. But what I want to especially focus on are some of the sort of future drivers of urban transformation that I mentioned around really data, food, and the circular economy. So we can see that even before Corona, smart city technology was growing, attracting investment and attention. We had sensors and products really all over the city. and we think that's okay. That's fine. But we also think that maybe humans and our lived experience is as important as a lot of technology in cities. And so what we've really begun to do is sort of tech enable people, community researchers, we call them, with a tool, an online tool that makes it very easy to collect data and information about who's in public space, what are they doing, where are they spending time. It's all anonymous, right? We're not collecting any personal information, but we're able to document, some of the data that I showed before about who's spending time where and what activities are beginning to change. And we do that through empowering locals to collect this type of data using a data protocol, and we could talk more about that if it's interesting. But the point is that we can leverage this sort of technical advancement in a way that is very much about lived experience, right? There's all kinds of data sources out there that sort of forms the baseline here, but we can really get insight into what it feels, tastes, and is like to live and spend time in parts of the city, and use that to help us make decisions. A concrete case of this layering of data is a collaboration that we've done with the city of Copenhagen and Google, where Project AirView has been driving around, of course, in an electric car and very slowly, driving around the city of Copenhagen for a couple of years, getting unprecedentedly fine-grained air pollution information. And they were able to then make a very detailed map of air quality in Copenhagen. So big data collected over 2 years, statistically consistent with the highest level of research from Utrecht University. And then what we did is tied that together with thick data, this idea of lived experience on top of that. So here you see a data dashboard where the Google AirView data here is pointing out where are the most polluted parts of the city. And we've collected data using our platform to say, well, where are the most vulnerable people, in this case, especially children, located in the city? And we can triangulate then these two data sources together with qualitative interviews with daycare teachers and preschool leaders to basically understand where do they take their kids, how do they use the city as part of their curriculum. So we can combine big data from Google, really expert interviews with teachers and daycare providers with this lived experience data to get something that essentially gives the city a strategy to deal with air pollution in a way that can reduce exposure to pollution in different parts of the city and invite for people to spend time in places with better air quality. So this complete network effect where we understand where we need to reduce exposure and where we need to invite for use. And that might look like this, relatively simple, low-cost improvements, but places where we can calm traffic, provide a green buffer at the height of children, blocking also from exhaust pipes from vehicles, increasing the distance from intersections, and inviting people to spend time, again, away from places with poor air quality. So this approach is really back to what I said at the beginning about designing our neighborhoods where what is good for you and is easy to, the easiest activity, it also becomes good for the collective. So this could be called, design for sustainable behavior or designing for health and well-being. Another key element of this approach is around food consumption behavior and the food system. We actually know that as soon as you start measuring the consumption of products, not only the production like we've done before, but now as we move to scope 3, it's called analysis of our CO2 consumption. Some of the largest gains can be done through what people eat. So 20 to 35% of carbon reduction with a balanced diet. And so this is, of course, very, very sensitive. But again, we think design and urban planning has a role to play in finding an opportunity to actually reduce obesity, loneliness, other negative social factors, while improving access to high quality food and improving quality of life. And so what's interesting is we have the great example of this, which is cycling in Copenhagen or in Denmark in general, where we know that a majority of people that bike do so because of selfish reasons. It's faster, easier, and more convenient to move through the city by bike than any other form of transport. So again, just reiterating this idea of what's good for you being good for society. So we have the case of cycling. What would that approach mean if we applied it to food systems? Well, what we're doing is we're working with a group called the EAT Foundation, together again with the city of Copenhagen, to answer that question. So what if healthy, affordable, sustainable food was as accessible as riding a bike in the city? So today, even with all of the government guidance on eating healthy, our meals are typically out of line with the planetary boundaries, which you see here in the orange circle, and they produce about 1.2 tons of CO2. If we ate within that boundary, we could actually produce 65% less CO2 and really put the city on a path towards carbon neutrality. So that sounds, again, great, this high level science, but what does that mean on the ground? And so what we've tried to do is actually work with kids, with 12 to 16-year-olds. This is the age group of people that begin to shape the food consumption behavior, understand what they want, what are the social conditions for them to feel welcome, invited, and included in public space, and then design for that. So we've just made a pilot project here with seating, colorful, flexible, inviting seating integrated with all sorts of edible plants, and not only the plants themselves, but also with commerce, made agreements with food trucks that would sell this planetary diet, with supermarkets located just nearby that would also provide special price discounts on planetary food elements, to begin to see how do we then begin to invite through the foodscape and through the food offer a different type of food behavior. And this, I can't share all the results with you yet, but it's coming. It's actually very exciting. And we know that that the next generation of children actually are very conscientious about food issues, and we could make a huge dent in our future carbon emissions by working with the food system. The final element is around circularity, circular economy, and how we think about circular neighborhoods and communities. So if you all know much about the circular economy, we know that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has done amazing research and said that, well, you can get about half of the carbon reduction that we need by focusing on mobility, food, and the built environment. So a lot can be done through the circular approach. But a lot of the initiatives so far focus on the supply. They focus on the materials. So the built environment, it's about reducing the amount of materials extracted, trying to be more efficient around energy and water, and trying to oftentimes design for disassembly or for recycling of materials themselves. We think that's great. Of course, these systems are there. These three pillars of the economy are strong. But we're also want to shift the conversation a bit. Yes, and what would a circular city look like if we started with people rather than materials? And I have some firsthand experience working with some of these people. These are my my kids who, when we went to the climate march last year, they made their own signs. And what's interesting to see is kids think very practically. They wrote elements about behavior, right? This says, eat less meat, save energy, save water, stop food waste. My kids didn't write a poster that says, sign the Paris Agreement or commit yourself to 1.5 degree targets. All that's true. But again, if we think about humans and our active little brains, we want to contribute to this. And so we want to actually focus on behavior ourselves, because we know that a lot of folks, especially the next generation, think that way. So what does this mean? This means that the supply side of the circular economy, which might create recycled bicycles or bike share programs, are fine, but the demand side around the culture around it, the infrastructure to invite for that behavior, is equally important. In the same way, we might have groups like IKEA and others making products of 100% recyclable materials, but the demand side then says we have to invite for them to actually be recycled. Again, this infrastructure and behavior question. So at the city scale, we have to balance supply and demand between the product, behavior, and infrastructure, which means that we actually have to really engage business, citizens, and government in a way that meets both sides of this supply and demand question. So we're equally thinking about behavior as well as material. So a very quick concrete example of that might be in the future, we know already the buildings can change use, and we can turn things like a church into a community center or a restaurant into a co-working space. But what might happen if we begin to design buildings as multi-purpose from the beginning? So rather than designing a school, a sports hall, or a community center, what if we just designed and built a building, a public building, with all sorts of interior and exterior services that could be used as a school, could be used as community center, dance hall, whatever. But from the very beginning, from its first design, planning, and implementation, it's built with all of those different stakeholders in mind, and built with the goal of being used 24/7, 365. So that's very quick. I'm going fast here, of course, but just to sum up what I've tried to say is that we think going forward, this agenda should be asking ourselves some key questions, like how might the lived experience actually unlock the potential of other smart city investments? Think of that Google air quality example that I mentioned. Also, how might designing the urban foodscape for planetary diet really help cities, corporations meet their ambitious CO2 reduction targets? And how might designing for circular behavior actually end up getting us to the resource savings and human flourishing ambitions that we have? So thank you for spending time here online, and I'll stop here.